Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our TRA 2020 webinar strategic session number 12, which is going to focus on the impacts of automation and digitalization on workforce. My name is Thierry Gauger. I'm the Secretary General of FERL. FERL is an association of research centers and transport authorities. We're doing research and development in the field of road and transport infrastructure. Today, I'm happy to be the moderator of this session, which was built by a number of organizations, in particular the European Commission, DG Move, DG RTD, ITRA, the European Transport Research Alliance, Eurocontrol, FERL, and ECTRI. I'd like, before going through the session, giving a very thanks to the main people who have built up this session, in particular, Maria Carbone from DG Move, who is here in the room with us, and Elizabeth Arsenio from the LNEC in Portugal. Both have been the head of this session, and I'm going to moderate it, but these were really their work. So thank you very much to them. Well, as the title indicates, the transport sector is adopting increasing levels of automation, as well as new innovative technologies such as AI, IoT for achieving safer and more secure operations, better efficiency and sustainability. These innovations, together with the disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, has also shown the importance of optimizing digitalization and AI for ensuring the safety and well-being of transportation workers. They have also brought changes to the nature of work, including the need to acquire new skills in addition to changes to the organization and work routines. This session today will really look at this integration of technologies with the current practices, and we'll look at the number of actions that we need to take to prepare the workforce of the future in such a way that we are mastering the transition of automation and we are not running behind it. So we will also take into account the COVID-19 aspect which strike along the development of that transition phase, and this will be part of the discussion today. For that, we have a number of speakers that we have been very pleased to welcome. We will have at first Robert Misson, Head of Unit at the Research and Innovation DG Move, who is together with us in the room and will give us some highlight and overall, let's say, context of the automation transition. Then we will have Philippe Merlot from Eurocontrol, Director, who will address some of the important human factors that are at stake in the aviation sector. We will then move on with Mr. Evangelos Bekaris, Director at the Hellenic Institute of Transport of the Center for Research and Technology, HELLAS, and ECTRI President. He will actually talk about the readiness and acceptance of automation in the various modes of transport. He will address also some consideration about the coronavirus and mention some of the preliminary response from the education system to the challenges induced by automation. Ms. Vipasha Barua from the Canada's Research Chair in Global Women's Issue, University of Western, will address to us a very interesting aspect about the gender equity in front of the upcoming transition to automation. Mr. Fabian Weilenzek from Deutsche Bahn, Head of Talent Acquisition, Region North, will give us some interesting insight into the operational aspect with a focus on the recruiting issues. And finally, Mrs. Lydia Spera, the Secretary General of the European Transport Workers Federation, will show us the first actions that we need to undertake to prepare the workforce for a highly automated transport system. Before we move on to the presentations, I'd like, first of all, to give you some very logistic aspects. I'd like to inform you that this session will be recorded so that it can be further used in the future and listened in the future. That's an important aspect. So if you have, let's say, problem with that, you can't be, I invite you not to stay, which is not really what I invite you to do. So I just want to warn you about that. The second aspect, just for practical, let's say, logistical issue, please switch off your microphone. The same, switch off your camera, except if you're invited to intervene. And to that respect, we will turn on the video for the speaker who is talking, and we ask them to be off. Then, if you have any comments or questions that you would like to address, please use the comment box and raise your comment. If it's a question that you'd like to address to one specific speaker, please mention the speaker name at the beginning of your question so that we know to whom you would like to have it addressed. This is important for the management of the discussion. The session is going to be divided into two parts. The first one will have some preliminary presentation from the 6 speakers, and then we'll move on to a discussion, hopefully an interactive discussion. We will master this one centrally, and we will try to pick up some of the questions, and most of them, if possible, before the end of the session. The session is meant to last 1 hour and a half. We will end at 3:30 at the latest. Good. So with this, I'd like to invite Mr. Robert Missen from DigiMove to present his first, the main context in Europe about automation.
Thank you very much, Thierry. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session. Unfortunately, we're not in Helsinki to be doing it, but circumstances allow this as a second best option. So I want to do a very just short introduction on impacts of automation and digitalisation, the transport workforce, from a European Commission perspective. Have the next slide, please. So as we see in Europe, there are various trends developing in the transport sector and work. New jobs appear and others become obsolete as work patterns change. Full-time work tends to be replaced now by more open-ended contracts. The work is increasingly being carried out on online platforms, connecting buyers and sellers, or by large project teams across borders and time zones. So the historical structure of companies is changing very much. Robotics and digitalisation raise new questions as machines progressively replace the human workforce for routine tasks, and new types of professional and personal skills are required to respond to technological progress. And active labour market policies in the EU are beginning to adapt accordingly. So, for example, directive on transparent and predictable working conditions, establishment of the new European Labour Authority. And of course, we're examining issues on ethical and practical problems relating to robotics and artificial intelligence. Next slide, please. We've seen, obviously, over the last 6 months, COVID and its impact on working and workforces there. This can only accelerate the trend towards automation and is also speeding up a general reflection on how work practices may or will change and the economic and social psychological impacts on the workforce of such changes. Next slide, please. Just to put it into context, when we're talking about automation and in the transport sector, transport is a key employer. Almost 11 million Europeans work in transport-related jobs there. Road transport, the road sector employs the most, along with the rail sector, but all modes of transport are significant employers in their own right there. The transport sector also has a skew in its age. It tends to be disproportionately older and also disproportionately more male people working. Around 80% of the workforce is male in the transport sector. So for the European Commission, we see 3 key challenges facing us when we talk about workforces. One is the age of the workforce, as I mentioned before. Around a third of the workforce in the transport sector is older than 50. This is a problem that's not going to go away, of course. Secondly, that only 22% of the transport workers are women. We want to have gender equality in the workforce and equal opportunities. If nothing else, using only 22% of the workforce is inefficient. And thirdly, the main topic today of digitalisation, new job opportunities, but also new skills will be required, both for transport workers and users alike there. So digitalisation is the main challenge we're discussing here, but it impacts on the workforce, because an ageing workforce will be less capable in dealing with digitalisation. And we are concerned that any effects on digitalisation and automation does not negatively impact that 22% figure on women. It's already too low, but we don't want it to be skewed in any way, even worse, by automation and digitalisation. So the ways forward from a European Commission point of view is primarily dialogue and research. So we have a specific platform, Women in Transport, for looking at the gender issues. We monitor safety and social standards, particularly developing technical standards for example, automated cars. A lot of work is going on that. And last but not least, we commit a lot of money to research of transport in general, and we have some specific topics looking at research for automation of transport. So, next slide, please. So just picking up on that, in the research area, we have a 3-year project, Skillful, which is identifying jobs that will change or disappear or be newly created by means of automation. This study is can be concluded at the end of the year. It's working not only in the EU, but also involving the US, and is exploring transport stakeholders' needs for more action at the EU level. As I mentioned, we also have tools for sharing best practices, such as the Women in Transport platform. We have events and organisations like Digital Transport Days. We have the European Social Fund that can invest in skills and education, including digital skills. And we have the Digital Europe programme as well. And last but not least, at the European level, we can always introduce legislation as well as and when is necessary there. So many transport professions have regulatory requirements and minimum qualifications and skills. There is a specific directive 2019-1152 on transparent and predictable working conditions. So that is a basic overview of the issue as far as the European Commission is concerned. I thank you now, and we are very much participating here in listening mode, because we want to hear the issues and perspectives from both industry sectors and also potential players, workers, etc. Thank you, Thierry.
Thank you, Robert. Thanks very much for this introduction. And regarding the woman perspective, we will have a nice insight from Vipasha Barua later on in the discussion. Great. Now I'd like to move on to the second speaker, and I will be happy to invite Philippe Merlot. Philippe, the floor is yours. Philippe, we cannot hear you. Yes. Philippe, are you? Philippe, can you hear us? We could hear you very well before. Yes, when you are moving.
Okay.
Yeah, now we hear you. Yes, yeah.
Okay, Sorry, I put on a headset, but I have to do it without it. So, first of all, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I have prepared some slides, so can you move to the next slides?
Yes.
Yes, so just to say that there is a long common history between aviation and automation. We have had operational autopilot in the aircraft for many years now, and today fly-by-wires is the norm for most of aircraft command chain. And in this connection between aviation and automation, the human dimension has always played a key role. All the topics about human-man interface, human factors, the human performance, making sure that the human workload remains within acceptable limits. All these topics have been very critical. And let me mention the most recent accident of the Boeing 737 MAX that was due to a badly designed automation device. This shows us that here we are not talking theoretical issues, but issues that can have very deadly consequences. So over the last years, many studies have focused on the human dimension and its importance on automation in aviation. And you have a few of these studies that are shown on this first slide. The last one having been published a few days ago, the human dimension in tomorrow's aviation system, published by the Chartered Institute of Ergonomics and Human Factors with our support. And I encourage you, of course, to have a look at all these studies. Next slide. We believe that aviation is going to change dramatically in the coming decades because of all the progress achieved in aircraft technology, in communication technology, and in information technology. And in fact, we can see it already happening with all the advanced drone prototypes that are flying today, with all the prototypes about electric air taxi. We are talking for airliners about single pilot operation. And of course, in the air traffic management field, we are more and more talking about virtual air traffic control centers. So this evolution will involve mostly enhanced automation, and automation will play a key role. And we believe that it will have huge consequences, especially on the workforce, on the profile requested by the aviation workforce, on the skills needed. From an operational point of view, we see the role of the aviation operators evolve towards the role of a flight manager, monitoring the evolution of the system in the middle term, but always ready to react in case of disruption or sudden disturbances. And from the technical point of view, we see more and more demand for information and communication technology skills. And on the whole, we believe that all the aviation job will evolve towards higher skilled position, and that it will make aviation more attractive to younger people. Of course, new forms of human-machine interface will need to emerge. in order to accompany this evolution. And of course, they will be to be designed in order to avoid new risks, work intensification, training mismatches, performance of recovery when automation fails. So these will be the main concern for the future of automation and for the future of the human dimension in automation. So next slide, please. We have developed this vision and roadmap slide in order to summarize at the same time the recent past and the topic we have identified for the future of automation and the future of human-machine interface. And we have identified topical issues like intuitive interfaces, biometric-informed adaptive automation, evidence-based scenario training, fully adaptive cockpit system, digital assistant interface, single pilot solution. I will not mention all of them, but when we, after having completed this vision and roadmap, we were faced with some questioning about the priorities, because we had too many avenues to be explored in front of us. I mean, too many potential solutions. So we felt the need for an input by our aviation stakeholders. And we set up a specific workshop for that in the framework of the European Commission Optics 2 project. So we invited the full assembly of aviation stakeholders. We presented all these projects for the future of the human-machine interface and the human dimension, and we requested their input and their priorities. And the main question was, how would you invest European research funding for human factors in aviation safety in the future? And so, we got very interesting feedback from them that is summarized in the next slide. So next slide, please. Yes, we saw clearly three phases emerge in the coming future for the focus, the main focus of the human dimension research. The first phase in the coming years would be concentrated on how to better monitor the human activities. How is it possible to provide better advisory tool to the human operators in order to restrict to the minimum the possibility and the risk of human mistakes? Once this phase completed, then the focus should move to implementing more robust automation tools. I mean, taking over more systematically for all the short-term real-time operation activities, and alleviating the workload of the human operator to be more focused on the monitoring of the system, the middle-term monitoring, and the ability to react in terms, in case of sudden incidents, in case of sudden disturbance. And then once the second phase completed, then artificial intelligence potential could really kick in and provide an additional boost to improve the performance of the global aviation chain. So, of course, here we are talking only on the focus, the main focus. Of course, it doesn't prevent us to start working on automation and artificial intelligence immediately. But it's just a scheme to explain where the focus should be. And this provides us, I mean, with a very structured roadmap for the future of research in automation and human dimension. In my last slide, so next slide, please. Next slide.
Yeah.
Yes, in this slide, I wanted, as a conclusion, to recall a few high-level principles that should be followed if we want to develop efficient and safe automation for the future. First, automation must always understand how people really do the work from the operational perspective, what really matters. So this is the first point. Second point, automation always needs to remain explainable. It has to be developed more as a kind of digital assistant to the human team, as part of the team in the cockpit, at the airport, or in the air traffic management operational room. Third principle for the definition of the new human roles, these new roles will need to be developed very carefully. We have to deal with the role of digital partner, artificial intelligence trainer, artificial intelligence supervisor, and also recovery expert. So here we see a new field of expertise emerging, intelligence resource management. We will need to develop that new field. And last but not least, automation is not infallible. So in order to tackle that, new safety assurance methods will need to be developed as well. And I will leave it there for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Merlo. Very interesting, and probably if I pick up one of the items that you stress is the digital assistance that we can expect from the automation, and maybe with as a counterpart the digital partner skills that needs to be developed from the human side and human factors. Thank you very much. We will be able to develop further in the discussion time. So now I'd like to move on to the next speaker. The next speaker is Mr. Evangelos Bekiaris from CERT in Greece.
Hello, Thierry. Hello, everybody. Next slide, please.
Yeah, one second.
Yep. Okay.
Good.
Let's go directly. We all know that digitalization, automation, and AI are expected to influence a number of things, among which employment and skills. However, we don't know how it's going to affect it. The initial theories speak about job polarization, meaning that at risk are mid-skill levels. The low level is the one to support the automation, the robots, to push them, if you like, in a way, and the high level to design them and control them. And this has already happened in the US, where we are losing in the middle skill jobs in the industry due to automation, sorry. And one example could be of tomorrow, the drivers of the vehicles that are mid-skill. However, in the future, when AI becomes more clever and can also undertake intellectual non-routine tasks, we might have the centripetal rather than polarity effect, meaning that you will need more people on the middle skill to maintain and support the robots, and much less in the other two. So we don't even know where we are going and when to lose jobs. Next. Transport is a big, let's say, jobs provider in Europe, not only. We speak about 5% gross domestic product and number of jobs. Probably if you go to the indirect ones, you can go up to 10%. However, there is another issue. 1/3 of workers in transport are quite old, getting 50 years or above. And in many cases, in many transport modes of jobs, transport is not the primary, let's say, a primary job selection of the younger generation. So we might have here some other effects. Let's go to some examples. Next, please. To the maritime industry, for example, people believe that only 15% of crews are prepared for smart shipping and autonomous elements. And also, a very big number, nearly 8%, are afraid of their jobs, or 2/3 maybe, are afraid of their jobs because of automation. However, if we look to specific parts within here, we can see that we have much less marine officers than we need. And if nothing would happen, by 2025, we would have in Europe only around 150,000 less than needed officers, where automation, by cutting 30 to 50,000, might actually help to bridge this gap rather than develop a new gap. On the other hand, it's not clear how many of the seafarers that are expected to work on sea would welcome that they're working instead from onshore. Might be good for some people, might be less good for others. Next one. The same is true for rail. In rail, we might have an impact to specifically the drivers and the signalers, and one can expect that some of them might lose jobs. However, there is quite an average, high average age of them. And in addition, it's expected that several of them will move to become part in the automatic train operation office, in the European traffic management system part, and so on and so on. Whereas the new people, newcomers, can still work, but can work more on the service provision and improve the quality of the service. Of course, we don't expect that drivers will become, will provide in the future service within the compartment, but newcomers can be more in this area. Next. To all this, of course, we have the coronavirus effect, which we haven't seen the end of it yet, so we don't know, and depending on the time and the outcome, we don't know really the impact, the real impact. However, there might be an impact, whether temporarily or long. Next, please. And as you see, transport, and specifically driver and vehicle operators, are among the occupations that are more on risk. Next, please. So we have seen some effects, like the effects in the automotive manufacturing area, where closing of production and less sales mean employment problems. Hopefully, this will come back to the initial numbers once we are over, and that might come earlier. We have seen in the seafarers that although the goods transport has not been so much affected, we have a lot of seafarers in the cruise sector that actually are facing unemployment or less employment. And it's useless to say things that we know about the air sector, where you are having problems both in the operation, in the airports, in the air industry, but also even in the manufacturers, as less and less, more and more orders of airplanes are being cancelled. So here we are seeing big issues. Next, please. And here we have to find solutions. We have to find solutions where the automation might help us to actually improve the situation. For example, the fact that the big data of travelers' movement have been opened by many big industries to follow the COVID situation might mean also that this data could be used by AI-based algorithms to optimize automation, demand responsive transport, shared mobility. Also, new materials like carbon-based public transport filters, antibacterial, and so on, will need to be produced for several modes, and this is another industry that will thrive. New product design, fiberglass, encapsulation, many other new developments are coming. Next. Here, monitoring technologies. The fact that we need actual more and more cameras for our automated vehicles, also inside for security reasons. These cameras can also be used for COVID or other control reasons related to resilience. Automation and robotics. The fact that maybe tomorrow the whole fleet of public transport, but even private, can be parked, cleaned, commissioned without people, obviously has a benefit for COVID and vice versa. And incentive and soft measures, we know that many cities around Europe, I have here the example of Paris. Actually, the Greek government just issued a relevant policy by law, have extended e-bike, have extended financing to these soft means, and obviously this also support shared mobility. Let me conclude with the next, showing that actually I believe automation is not a real danger. However, it requires adaptability, so does COVID, and we need actually to be fast and efficient in adapting technologies, means, services, and even behavior. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Evangelos. You mentioned several issues where we could pick up the aging, and you reinforce what was introduced earlier by Robert Misson. This is particularly of great importance in the transport sector, and this is something we can be developing later on in the discussion. This was a topic also that you address once again about the gender issue, and we have now a speaker with a specialist in that dimension. So I'm happy to welcome now Mrs. Bipasha Barua. The floor is yours. Bipasha, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, great.
Okay, perfect. Good morning. Good morning from London, Ontario in Canada, and I suppose good afternoon for you.
Good morning to you.
I will use my time to discuss how automation will affect gender equality. And I'm obviously going to speak in very broad and general terms, but I'm very happy to answer more nuanced and complicated questions as they may come up. I have so many devices on at the same time, sorry. So as we've already heard, transport workers represent approximately about 5% of all employees in the world. And in 2017, this was about 168 million direct jobs. And of that, as we've already heard, only about 22% are women and more than 80% are men. Now, on to the next slide, please. So when we look at all modes of transport, no, the one before that, sorry, the slide before that. Okay, so when we look at all modes of transportation, when we look at aviation, road, rail, inland waterways, and maritime, we find that there are three general findings across all transport modes when we speak of automation. The first is that the introduction of automation will be, evolutionary rather than revolutionary. I think this is important. So the pace of the introduction and diffusion of automation will actually be gradual, and it'll be strongly influenced by the local context. Automation will affect medium and low skilled workers the most. We're already familiar with this. So if we look at OECD countries, for example, we find that between 6% and 50% of low skilled jobs, so when we're talking about dockers, baggage handlers, jobs like that, are exposed to a high risk of automation. And for medium skilled jobs, so say, for example, seafarers, heavy truck drivers, we're talking at somewhere between 7% and 23% are at high risk of automation. What is consistent though is when we look at professional, scientific, and technical services, so high skilled workers, less than 2% of jobs are at high risk of automation. And the thing to remember is that even if low and medium skill jobs, which involve predictable physical activities and data processing, even if these jobs are automated, there will be a demand for new types of jobs, such as remote operators, worldwide operating maintenance crews, and, for example, mobility as a service provider jobs. So although the skills required for individual jobs will be different, the global transport workforce is actually expected to grow rather than shrink over the next 20 years, which means that automation will likely result in a shift in the workforce, but not so much in labor reduction. And as we're already aware, there is a tremendous economic incentive for automation. But automation in the future will also be motivated by environmental and increasingly by safety concerns, including, for example, the scenario that COVID has presented in our world. This is the next slide, please. Now, moving on to gender equality, within the context of growing automation in transport, women must, of course, simultaneously navigate advantages and disadvantages. And I think if you look at these skill sets, if you look at different skills that are used at work, and this is data from Canada, this is the context I'm most familiar with, but I think other OECD countries are very similar. When you look at all different types of skills, if you look at general skills, you find that women actually have an advantage. They tend to use more of them. And I'll mention what general skills are, what I mean by them in the next slide. There's interacts with computers. Again, we find that actually there are more women using digital skills. The challenges for women are in managerial positions. I think you can see that there is a gap there where there are way more men. Social skills, again, women have traditionally always used them more often. So again, there is an advantage. And technical skills, or more broadly, what I call professional, scientific, and technical services, those are skills, again, where women seem to be at a disadvantage compared to men. So it's not all bad news. It's kind of the glass is half empty and half full. On to the next slide, please. In general, what we find is that women are much more concentrated in jobs in the transport sector that use more generalist skills. So generalist skills have actually served women very well in jobs that are increasingly being displaced by technology, but these skills are also central to jobs that are much more difficult to automate. So the more cognitive and the more variable a job is, the lower the possibility of automation. And women have traditionally held many positions, many such positions. Often as a result of structural gender inequality, women have often actually acquired skills such as patience, humility, ability to navigate and diffuse conflict that ironically there will be a payoff for in the future. So, and more men, frankly, will be well advised to acquire some of those skills in the future. More men tend to work in occupations in the transport sector where the primary skills are specialized and task specific. So this generalist specialist divide has very important implications for how men and women are likely to weather this disruption in the future. The demand for the generalist skill set, when we look at things like critical thinking, social perceptiveness, active listening, writing, complex problem solving, is expected to increase while machines displace much more kind of like the machine, or especially the more rote tasks that involve rote cognition and physical labor. And women may actually have an advantage in navigating this transition. The next slide, please. So when we look at the human and the digital skills that will be in much demand in the future, we find that women are already using them. Occupations that require digital and social skills have seen very strong employment growth. Again, this is from Canada. We looked at the years between 2013 and 18. As you can see, if you think of skills like resolving conflict, negotiating with others in terms of social skills, or technical skills like interacting with computers, analyzing data or information, we find that these are skills that have witnessed big growth in employment over the past 8 years, and they are going to continue in the future. Next slide, please. The biggest challenge for women in transport, I would say, is that they are underrepresented in professional, scientific, and technical services and managerial jobs that are often the most well-paid and often least at risk of automation. So I would say that looking specifically at the transport sector, what I find is that the challenges of recruiting and retaining women up to about the middle ranks are gradually being addressed globally, but really persistent barriers remain for addressing women's underrepresentation in management jobs, senior executive positions, and on the boards of directors of transport companies. So although the deployment of automation may render some kinds of low and medium skill jobs, some people might become jobless, automation may actually represent tremendous opportunities for advancement for some medium skilled female workers in the transport sector, because they already use very strong generalist digital and social skills, and these will be in higher demand in the future, and larger numbers of women than men already draw upon these skills. So what I like to say is that the transport sector is not actually, I wouldn't think of the entire sector as being gender unbalanced. I would say that certain occupations within the sector tend to be. So it's helpful to think about occupations as opposed to just thinking about, broadly speaking, of sectors as being male or female dominated. I think that in the future, the most important piece is that retaining and promoting women within the transport sector will require a shift in how skills and talent are recognized, how they're evaluated, and how they're also promoted. So I would say that within the prevailing practices of the transport sector, women may be at a disadvantage when it comes to promotion and leadership because they lag behind in jobs, typically in managerial jobs. So this is, if you look at the graph there, this is for Canada, the data is for Canada, but if you look at all different age groups, if you look starting from age 20 to 24 and then looking up to 30 to 35, consistently what we find is that men gain management experience at a much earlier age, which enables them then to start acquiring and developing the skills associated with organizing people and with managing projects sooner. Even if you look at the, the age group of 20 to 24, which I think of as being my student age group, even there we find that there are twice as many men already acquiring management experience compared to women. So this very early divide compounds over the length of people's careers and makes it much more difficult for women to catch up. So which is why we see that in many of these occupations, there are large numbers of women working in, say, fields like human resources, working in various other occupations. But when we start looking very specifically at the transport sector, we find that women are a minority on boards and on senior leadership of companies, because you need management experience to be able to step into those positions. To sum it all up, what I would say is that automation will affect both male and female workers, but there are long established and very pervasive structural and societal barriers that make it much harder for women to make that transition. So for example, women have less time to reskill or to search for employment because they spend so much more time than men on unpaid care work. Women are less mobile due to physical safety, challenges of infrastructure, as well as legal challenges. And sometimes for the very nature of structural social inequality, women are less mobile than men. And also women have lower access to digital technology and participation in professional, scientific, and technical fields compared to women. So what can we do? My final slide, please. I think policymakers and businesses, they need to step up interventions, and some that are targeted at women to overcome these barriers. So the most significant, I would say, is investment in training, particularly for what I would consider professional, scientific, and technical services, but that's a field that is broader than STEM. So I don't just mean STEM, I also include things like legal, accounting, architecture, design, consulting, research, and policy. And I think transitional support is very important so that people who are already in their respective jobs have the support through professional funding, for example, professional development funding, so that they can actually prepare for reskilling ahead of time. The provision of childcare and safe and affordable transportation, again, that is very obvious and very important. I think addressing stereotypes about occupation, so creating a demonstration effect where we no longer associate certain types of occupations with a certain gender will be very important. Increasing women's representation in, as well as access to technology. And by that, I also mean the design of technology, which is a field where women are underrepresented. And finally, I think enhancing social protections and safety nets for all workers will make a big difference. And one of the things that has happened during COVID is what we're increasingly seeing around the world is that we are adopting some form of basic, universal basic income, for example. So if you look at countries, Canada has what is now was introduced as an emergency response, but we're discussing the possibility of maintaining it in the future as a universal basic income. I see these as very positive developments for all workers because they provide all workers with a very basic sense of security that will then enable them to think about reskilling, for example, or switching occupations in the future. So I see those as the major issues that we need to think about when we speak of gender equality and automation in the transport sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bipasha. And if I pick up, maybe one important aspect of what you said, you stress, if I'm correct, that on one side, you say that women may have advantage in a way in this transition management due to their skill in generic skills, if I might say it this way. At the same time, they also suffer from being less agile to cope with the automation. So this is a difficult challenge, dichotomy that you may even be, you may even bring us some further information in the discussion part. Thank you very much.
I'm very happy to. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So, well, let's move on now after having a look to these different aspects. We'd like to have more insight into some operation. So, and especially what's happening in big companies about recruiting, and are there any existing, let's say, methods and approach to favor the readiness towards automation. So for that, I'm happy to welcome Fabian Willenzek from the Deutsche Bahn. And Fabian, I'm going to
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I think we can start immediately with the second slide. So yeah, I'm Fabian. I'm from Deutsche Bahn, in charge of recruiting or talent acquisition in the region North. Probably the most of you know Deutsche Bahn. We are one of the leading mobility and transportation companies in the world. We have more than 330,000, actually. I just looked up the most current number, people around the globe working for us, whereas 2/3 are about in Germany. So it's a huge workforce, and we need to take all of them onto our journey towards more digitalization and automation. So just a few words about Deutsche Bahn. We operate basically in 3 business areas. First of all, transport, passenger transport. So every day, 7.3 million passengers use our trains, mainly, or also buses, or one of our 5,700 train stations in Germany. The second business area is transport and logistics of goods. So we are active in 140 countries with our major companies, DB Schenker and DB Cargo. So we transport goods in one of our 29,000 trains, but also by boat, by plane, and by truck. So more or less in all the fields of the transport business. And the third one is infrastructure. So we are in charge of maintaining and also developing the rail infrastructure, mainly in Germany, but also outside of Germany. And here in Germany, we manage 33,200 kilometers of tracks. So it's a huge system with a lot of people and many people who rely on our service. So our goal is it, and now I would like to transfer to our current strategy. Our goal is it to design and to operate the transport network of the future. So digitalization and automation plays a big role. We will do that by integrating the operation of traffic and railway infrastructure, as well as connecting all models of transportation. So not only trains, but everything there is. Very intelligent, economically, but also ecologically. So therefore, we developed our overarching strategy, which is called Strong Rail. So we would like to shift as many people, as many goods on the rail as possible. And this will lay the foundation we need to be successful in terms of this endeavor. So our new strategy covers three major strategic areas. First of all, we want to be more robust. What we say, we need more services, more routes, more trains, and more employees as well. So within the next years, we will hire 100,000 people in Germany due to demographic change, but also new employees to support us in our vision. The second strategic area is to set the whole company into organization, or the whole organization into motion. Deutsche Bahn is a very complex company, huge, and most of our processes are not fit for digitalization and automation. So therefore, we have to install simple structures, as simple as possible. We need to examine our workflows and optimize our processes and streamline them throughout the whole organization. The third one, and this is the most future part, is our pioneering part. So for DB, this means we need to move very quickly. We need to offer more services, also different services, and we need to deliver intermodal solutions. To fulfill the strategy, of course, we need a workforce which is ready for digitalization and for automation. And I would like to show you a few measures, not only in talent acquisition, but also other parts in HR, which help us to do so. So maybe you can go into the next slide. So I tried to put our measures in four layers. The first one would be talent acquisition. So how do we hire digital minds? First of all, we need a strong employer branding. We do this now for several years, and we also always adapted our messages and our employer branding to the strategy. So we need to show that we are a modern company, that we are shaping the future, and we need people who want to join us in order to help us in the strategy. Secondly, we need to be data-driven in recruitment. This is not only in terms of our recruiting strategies, but also in terms of how we consult the company. So if we are doing major decisions, for example, opening up a new subsidiary or a new plant or building a new organization, we always have to keep in mind where is the labor market where we get the people with a fit digital modern mindset to put these plans into practice. Thirdly, digital recruiting strategy. So this is the part which is probably the most influenced by COVID-19. Before, of course, we had interviews in person and we had digital ways and probably more digital than many other companies, but not fully. So within 1 week after the lockdown in Germany, after 1 week, we changed our whole strategy, our whole recruitment strategy to a digital strategy. And now all our measures are completely digital, and this gave us, of course, a huge shift towards digitalization for the whole company or for the whole organization as well. Fourth, in terms of talent acquisition, is future-oriented targeting. So as I said, 100,000 employees, new employees within the next years. This year it will be about 24,000 employees in Germany, new employees in Germany. If we hire them with the right mindset, with already existing digital skills, we have a huge impact on the level of automation and digitalization within our company. So as soon as we have all these people, of course, we need to give them the right environment to work digital. This starts with equipment and infrastructure. Every employee at Deutsche Bahn is equipped with a digital device and can participate in social internet, digital processes, and this more or less is the foundation for digital work in the future. But we also need to provide workspace and environment where they can work according to these devices. So we shifted from single cubicle offices to open space where exchange can happen, but this also includes the opportunity to do home office, for example, which is really important at the moment. And having all these people equipped with digital devices helped us in this very difficult phase. Especially for our existing workforce, we have an average age of 45. So many of our employees have not grown up in the digital world. We need experimental space so they can lose the fear of digitalization. We need them to experiment with new technologies such as 3D printing or virtual reality. And we have the spaces in all the major cities where our employees are located. And the fourth one, exchange. So digitalization means working together, collaboration, and we as an employer need to offer our employees this exchange and to work together, collaborate along the whole organization. And of course, the fourth one, and Pasha always said that, development. So we have to develop our workforce that starts with the modern competence management, where digital skills are part of every job profile. And this goes further with digital vocational education. So all our vocational trainees are equipped with tablets. Major parts of our training is digital, also including tools such as virtual reality. But we also need to offer continuous training for our older employees. We are doing that constantly. Just last week, we had our week of new work where we offered every employee at Deutsche Bahn discussions, and also trainings in terms of new work and digitalization. But all these tools, all these new frameworks, they don't work if we work like we used to 20 years ago. So therefore, we also need to change the style we are working towards more agile teams, towards project work, and so on and so forth. The fourth one is, how do we shape the future from an HR perspective? And we have here now a very new way of doing that. And maybe you can go on to the next slide so we can have, a look in the machine room. We installed the HR Future Lab, and the goal of this HR Future Lab is to enable Deutsche Bahn to predict future developments for all job profiles very early, so then we can derive measures and implement these measures. So we work in a laboratory character in uncertain circumstances. We reach our solutions incrementally. We have a diverse team from people from inside the company, but also outside the company. And we develop this method, which helps us to predict the future job profiles. So we start with research. So it was very interesting to listen to the previous speakers. We look at research to all the trends which are impacting a specific current job profile. We gather all the information we need on this job profile to get an idea how they are working, what they are doing, what skills are needed today. And then together with trend experts from inside the company, but also from outside the company, together with job experts, we try to predict how a future job profile will look like. So let's say in 10 to 20 years. But not only how it will look like, but also when it will occur. So when this vision of a new job profile will be reality. We will validate the predicted job profile together with a small amount of employees within this job profile. So let's say, for example, when we talk about train drivers, we look at a certain environment, such as the Berlin Underground, for example, to see what impact our profile will have on this workforce, and then further on, we will transfer it to this job profile in general. So this method is now very manual and takes a lot of time, a lot of manpower to develop these profiles. We're now working on a more scalable digital solution. So this tool in the end can be used not only by Deutsche Bahn, but more or less on every job profile, also outside the company. So far from me, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fabian. This was really interesting. And this is a good introduction now to the last speaker. We talk a lot about the skills needed. We talk about research and so on. And I think it's also nice to have, let's say, a look at the matter from the workers' perspective. And to that respect, I'm very happy to welcome now Mrs. Livia Spera, who is Secretary General of the European Transport Workers Federation, and she will bring us some insight into the matter. Livia, the floor is yours. You can also turn on your camera if you wish.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks a lot for the opportunity of presenting the ETF point of view in this debate. Indeed, in a panel discussion when we talk about transport workers and the future of transport workers, it is important to also have transport workers on board. First of all, a very preliminary remark on the fact that it would be nice also, as also we are talking about women issue, it would be nice also to have more gender balanced panels in the future. So next slide, please. I will just tell you in a short, in a few words what we are. So the ETF is a federation of more than 240 trade unions from 41 European countries, so our scope goes beyond the European Union. We represent more than 5 million workers in all transport modes and in fisheries. We are the recognized social partners in the EU. This means that the European Commission check our representativeness every few years, because we are part of 8 sectoral social dialogue committees together with our employer counterpart, the employers associations at EU level, and we can take a series of initiatives with them. In most of the committees at the moment, we are talking obviously about digitalization and automation, but our remit can go as far as agreeing and presenting draft directives to the European Council, which in some cases we did. We also work beside our lobbying advocacy work in Brussels. We also work on transnational campaigns. For instance, our Fair Transport campaign of a couple of years ago, we promote joint actions amongst our members. We promote company networks. We work on European Works Council, but we also promote research. We have been partners with some of the organizations that are present here today. We promote transnational projects, and we also help our members building their capacity. Next slide, please.
Sorry. No. Yeah, sorry.
So this is basically what I just said. So we are, this is our mission. What we do, we are the voice of transport workers in Europe. We defend the interests of our members, and our ambition is, of course, to shape the future of work in transport, which is what I'm going also to tell you. Next slide, please. I think we first need to make also, we need to take stock also of the diversity of transport. So we are talking now about everything a bit mixed together, but of course a ship is not a plane, and a plane is not a part, and so on. So there are also a lot of there is also a lot of diversity in transport, of course, and the discussion about automation and digitalization shall also be taken at more, let's say, sector-specific level. The discussion today was pretty much also focusing on attractiveness. Okay, there are some discussions how can the attractiveness of transport, especially towards women and youngsters, can be improved through technological progress. For me, for us at the ETF, there is a clear way to improve attractiveness, and is improving working conditions. The previous speakers, one of the previous speakers mentioned, for instance, shipping. Why we lost European employment in shipping? Well, this is because basically working conditions are not good enough, and this led to a huge loss of know-how and jobs in Europe. So when we talk about attractiveness, we need to take a really wide perspective and not just focusing on technological improvement. So what is our view? As I said, in very general terms, as we are not focusing on any particular sector, we are not Luddites, of course. We are not here to say that we will break computers or digital technologies, but we believe that when technological progress is applied to transport, be it in terms of digitalization or automation, we need a business case. So we need clearly a cost-benefit analysis, and we need to see who's benefiting from technological process. Is there a benefit, and are the costs justified by this benefit? Indeed, we will always keep opposing any process of digitalization and automation that is done without negotiations with the trade unions, and I will develop this a bit further. We also think that as humans, we do not believe in a workerless transport sector. We believe that there will always be workers. It will be a different kind of workers. We will have a new phase of working people in transport, but all technological developments applied to transport need to be worker-centered, because at the end of the day, there will be workers that will be the user of this technology. And of course, we will also be opposing the use of technological progress to bust trade unions, so to remove trade unions from workplaces, to weaken workers' rights, and to limit collective bargaining. It is also worth noting that the technological process that we are having now is going at a very high speed, but transport has also evolved over the years. If we look at the port, for instance, this is clear, but not only in ports, in airports and in every other working environment. And transport workers have always adapted, and adaptation, and they have learned new skills, but adaptation has gone smooth when there was involvement from the very beginning of workers and of their trade unions. And this is, I think, a key principle that I would like to stress throughout my presentation. And dialogue and involvement is also very important from very early stages, for instance, from equipment design. We always, as transport workers, we are trying to get involved with some equipment designers, but this is an extremely difficult objective to achieve. Next slide, please. As we can't talk today without mentioning COVID-19, of course, COVID-19 has been an accelerator, as it was already said, for digitalization, especially. Now, again, we shouldn't use COVID-19 as an excuse to automate and to cut jobs. There will be now there is a question of social distancing and so on. There will be, of course, a post-COVID-19, and we need to make sure that we keep as many jobs as possible. There is one of the previous speakers mentioned that there were not so many job loss in some of the sectors. Let's think about aviation, for instance, where the job loss is huge. So again, it's three big issues at the same time. There is the COVID-19, there is the automation and digitalization, and there is the need to deal and to adapt to the climate emergency. This is something that we are trying to deal with at the same time, and it's a very complex issue. Then there is a matter, it was also mentioned earlier, about homework. Indeed, some workers in transport, in the administration, or in some support jobs can work from home, but most of our members on the operational side have been on the front line, and have not always been rewarded for this, by the way, but yeah, they kept working during the crisis. Next slide, please. So as I said earlier, we think we need to see if there is a business case for technological development. There is a need for cost-benefit analysis, and we need to see what the effects are on the society at large. In many cases, automation or digitalization are not necessarily representing or causing savings for final customers or final users. We should also wonder what is the purpose of investing in technology that does not allow to reinvest in people and to create benefits, to create jobs, and to create let's say value for the society at large. And we should also take into account that, especially in transport, there is a lot of public financing. There is a lot of public financing for infrastructures as well, but also for research projects. So we should also make sure that there are social strings attached to this funding that are being given to the sector. So what is the return for the society at large? There is also a matter, of course, of if we lose jobs in certain, because jobs will change, but there will be probably some job loss. If we lose jobs, how do we replace this income tax, for instance? Shall we be brave enough and start talking, for instance, about robo taxes or digitalization taxes? If we can tax labor, why can't we tax other means of production? So these are, of course, debates that are extremely complex and difficult for a Monday afternoon, but we believe that at the moment they are not taken seriously enough by policymakers. And then next slide, the effect of digitalization and automation of workers. So it was said, yeah, we are not expecting huge job losses. We are expecting some changes in what workers will do, in what workers do, and this is probably true in some of the sectors. Now, all the previous discussions have been a bit more, let's say, on general content. Now I would like to bring you to the reality of transport workers. And if you go to a port or to an airport with 50, 55-year-old low-skilled workers whose retiring age is going is constantly being raised, increased, and these are workers that in most cases it's extremely difficult to retrain for more digitalized skills. There is a problem. So it's not just to say, yes, we need to retrain people, yes, we need to give fund to retraining. We also need to look at the reality of the sector, and we need to see that there are some concrete obstacles to retraining which need to be tackled. And that's why what we need is political willingness to tackle this from the institutional point, from the institutional side, but also from the employer side. There should be a willingness to engage in discussions with the union from the very beginning, as I said earlier, and there should also be, of course, funds available, because these are all very costly operations. Another special word that has been developing over the last decade is the platform economy. There, it's a totally different set of problems, because we have in front of us workers that are not considered workers; they are considered self-employed. We call it bogus self-employed because these people are actually they have nothing that can help them define self-employed, and what is more, in front of us, we have no employer. So I'm not saying that taxi companies are better employers than Uber is, but when we have a problem with a taxi company, we can meet the management, we can strike, we can engage in negotiations. This is not the case for platform employers, as they do not consider themselves as an employer. So this is a total break in the right of workers also to engage in collective representation and negotiations. There are also very new occupational health and safety challenges. This is very specific to each sector, of course, but for instance, in the question also of using data, or in the matter of how the right to disconnect and many other things. So this needs to be explored because it's still at a very preliminary stage. In some of our sectors, we see an opportunity for giving more professionalism to workers. If we look at truck drivers, for instance, but this is where also employers are not really keen on investing because it is so cheap to employ truck drivers at the moment. What is the incentive for this haulage company, which are mainly small or medium sized, to invest in automated trucks and so. But for us, this could be maybe an opportunity. We are saying already for decades that truck drivers are professional. So this could be maybe an opportunity to make their professionalism recognized, and possibly to limit social dumping, which is a real plague in the sector. And then, of course, there is also an opportunity for improving working conditions, several of them, but if we want to remain in road transport, the digital tachograph, or in other sectors as well where it can be applicable, the digital tachograph. Now, also with the mobility package, there are some improvements that are possible because of technological improvement. So the picture is quite diverse. And then the next slide, please, which is my last. I think there must be a problem. Yeah, there was a problem. So forget the first point. So as I said earlier, we believe that political debate is not as fast as actually the technologies are developing. We need more ambitious discussions, more ambitious decisions, and also more worker-centered. The transition needs to be negotiated. So one of our motto is no automation without negotiation, and it needs to be funded, of course, because it is quite a costly process. And we see there one key instrument, which is collective bargaining. We have example of this where through collective bargainings there is more acceptance of technological change. Because the collective bargaining, it's a democratic process which also allows workers to benefit from the benefits of technological development. So to take their share, for instance, through decreasing of working time or other measures that can be negotiated, free training, and so on. And then, of course, enhancing social dialogue. Well, this is something it's more general. It's about also the more political discussions. We see that it's not always the case that that we are invited at the table, and that even when we are invited or impose ourselves at the table, our point of view is taken into account. But as I said at the beginning, we represent those who are in the front line, and we have, of course, the right to the legitimacy to be around the table. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Pera, and I think your point was of great value to our session today. This has completed the picture. We got the different focus that we wanted to address, to look indeed at the impacts of automation and this transition that is, well, very likely to be done on an evolutionary basis against some let's say, revolution that we thought earlier, very likely getting centric or not the polarized effect as we are imagining at the moment. So, well, in the discussion time that is now limited to about 5 minutes, I'll be happy to ask every speaker to turn on your camera. And I'd just like to follow up on mostly on the last presentation, which talked a lot about the actions. And maybe because we talk indeed about the COVID-19, and in some aspect it looks to be on one side as a positive and sometimes as a negative. In any case, it has boosted the implementation of the digitalization. And maybe, I'd like to ask Robert Missen, what do you think about this COVID? Is it really the game changer for transportation?
Thank you, Thierry. I think when we're discussing automation and digitalisation on the workforce, we shouldn't really focus on COVID. If you look back in the history of 20th century transport, we've had incidents like 9/11, volcanic ash crisis, even the 1973 fuel crisis. All of these had massive impacts on transportation, but were very short-term and short-lived. They were blips, basically. COVID will turn out to be the same when we look back in 10 or 20 years' time there. It will have been a blip. The importance of COVID is just simply that it is making everybody think slightly differently how we should work. It makes employers think, it makes employees think, and in the case of transport, how we use transport, whether we're passengers or consumers of products that are delivered to our doors. That is the benefit, if that's the right word, of COVID. It's that making us all think, and in that thought process, the discussions about automation and digitalisation will come into play. But COVID itself is almost irrelevant. There are issues that need to be addressed on COVID, but those are completely independent of automation and digitalisation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Missen. Yes, looking at the glass half full is always better than looking at it half empty. Well, we talked a lot, and the speakers mentioned several times the need for training. Training our transport engineers, operators, technicians, economists, and so on. Maybe I'd like to raise a question to Mr. Beccaris. Could you, maybe on the basis of the Skillful project, enlighten us on the overall training program to upgrade the skills of the workers that we have found?
Yes, I think that within Skillful, we developed a big number of training curricula, and we tested some of them, showing that indeed it's possible to retrain towards the needs of digitalization and automation several workers. Obviously, not everybody. It's absolutely clear that it depends on the age and on the knowledge. But most important from that is, first of all, the issue that you need to have a European certification of the training schemes. So if you certify someone to be able to make the maintenance of an automated vehicle, this someone should be very fast, not waiting the long-lasting procedure, be certified across industries, across borders. Also, we need lifelong training. The technology is changing very fast. We need to see from the engineer to the last operator that we have this lifelong training, and we have obviously funding for that, and harmonization of the training. Here, indeed, is also the issue about social contracts and labor relations that will indeed guarantee that people that are affected directly or indirectly by automation will be able to be retrained.
Thank you. Mr. Willenbeck, you highlighted these interesting and innovative methods to predict how current job will be changed in the future and how we could address it. Maybe could you give us a very few examples in 1 minute?
What we're doing, yeah. So I mean, we are piloting now many things. So our method, which I briefly described, for example, we started with the trained drivers. Now we are working on the job profile of construction supervisors. And next one will be the data analyst. So we try to have a look in very technical job profiles, but also some which are already very digital. And so far, our approach seems to be kind of interesting also for other companies. And what we try now is to describe all the job profiles by skills, by a skill catalog, which can then be adapted to every other job in the world as well. So every job profile is based on these skills, and if we know how the skills or which skills are relevant in the future, we can from there derive the job profile of the future. And hopefully in a few months we'll have a method, and I will let you know, and then you can maybe test it in your organization as well.
Thank you. Well, all of you have called for research and deployment of innovative approach and solutions. Maybe from the aviation sector, Mr. Merlo, could you give us very quickly some of the highlights from your side?
Well, I think the research and development community has a key role to play in defining the new roles for the human with regard to this enhanced automation. And I believe one of the key issues is the ability of the human to recover faced with the failure from automation or any sudden unforeseen disturbances. And for that, of course, you have to develop very specific research and development based on simulation. You have to develop very realistic scenarios, and you have to be able to identify what are the main risks and how these risks should be tackled. So these are the main challenges for the R&D community, being able to demonstrate that in case of failure of enhanced automation, the human is still able to recover.
Very interesting. Thank you. Mrs. Baroa, would you see any additional research, especially taking into account the gender equity?
When I think about my research studying gender, inequality, basically, I think the need of the hour is really collecting and analyzing more gender disaggregated data, because there's very little data that is actually gender disaggregated, and jobs in transport tend to be dispersed across different sectors of employment. So I would say collecting and analyzing more gender disaggregated data is vital. Beyond that, beyond just understanding how many men and how many women, I think it would really help to have access to more intersectional gender data, meaning how does gender then intersect with other identity markers, like age, ethnicity, disability, language, class. I think that's very important to understand the specific challenges and opportunities faced by workers. Livia mentioned older workers, and I completely agree, but there are other groups. So disabled workers, for example, migrant workers, diaspora workers, who I think are multiply challenged within the transport sector.
Thank you very much. Maybe we could, of course, discuss for more than 2 hours additionally, but if I just conclude, could we, and especially I'd like to hear Mrs. Pera about that. Would you give us a few best practices that are currently existing and that could be shared amongst the different transport shareholders and stakeholders?
Yeah, sure. We are preparing at the moment a toolkit for our members, where we want to, because we want to share some good practices. I would see, if I have to choose two, I would see two in particular. One in the metro in Madrid, where there was a clear social dialogue process because of the loss of job due to the closure of ticket offices, for instance. So these people were deployed in service, customer service, so as to be present to help people in stations or on vehicles and so. And then there is another very good, Deutsche Bahn also signed actually an agreement with our members EVG in Germany, and then there is a very very good other example in Germany as well, which is for a port company. It's called Eurogate, where they've negotiated a new system which actually uses or takes the German code determination system to a higher level. And so in this company now there is an automation commission that was set up, which is joint between employers and employees, and where decisions on automation and digitalization are discussed from the very beginning. So we believe this is really This is really a groundbreaking agreement that we hope will be replicated also in other contexts.
Thank you, Mrs. Pera. And this will be the last word for this strategic session. I would like to thank you all very much, and I'd like to thank the speakers, Mr. Missen, Mr. Merlo, Mr. Beccaris, Mrs. Barua, Mr. Willenzeg, and Mrs. Pera. Thank you very much for your time and your great input for that strategic session of TRA 2020, which could not be done live, at least presential, but we could make it online, and this is probably the way forward towards also digitalization and automation. So we are practicing, in a way, what we are preaching. So I'd like to thank once again the organizer, the European Commission, DG Move and DG RTD, ITRA, Eurocontrol, FERL and NECTRI, and a special thanks to once again to Maria Carboni in the room and Elisabete Arsenio from LNEC. Thank you once again. We cannot give a round of applause, but I can simulate it. And we wish you a good end of the day, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, bye.